spent 10,000 years building the ultimate weapon. A machine designed to murder gods. But when they captured one fragile human, everything they believed about power shattered. Before we dive deeper into the story, please subscribe. It costs you nothing but helps stellar HFY a lot. In the frozen, merciless heart of the galaxy, where ancient stars bled their final light into an unforgiving void of eternal night, the Vexery dominion stood unchallenged for millennia. Or so they desperately believed. For 10,000 agonizing cycles, the Celestials had ruled over them like insignificant insects crushed beneath a god's indifferent heel. These towering beings of pure stellar fire and cosmic fury demanded absolute worship, endless tribute, and the occasional planetary sacrifice whenever their divine whims twisted into cruel amusement. Entire glittering cities crumbled into radioactive dust under relentless plasma storms, all for the unforgivable crime of a single unanswered prayer. Mighty fleets, once proud symbols of Vexery might, vanished screaming into the insatiable maw of engineered black sun simply because one brave scientist had dared to whisper a question against the sacred cosmic order. Supreme Overlord Thalvor, his obsidian chitin scarred from decades of silent rage, remembered with crystal clarity the day his own clutchmates were vaporized on the blood-soaked altar of the Eternal Spire. He had been merely a soft-shelled hatchling then, eyes wide with innocent terror as the Celestial's voice thundered across the heavens like the death knell of worlds, "Obey! Or burn." That soul-crushing terror had never truly left him. Instead, it had hardened, year by brutal year, into something far colder than ice and sharper than any blade forged in the void. It became purpose. It became vengeance. Now, deep within the shadowed, radiation-scorched asteroid forges of the Forbidden Void Reach, the greatest scientific minds and military strategists of the entire Dominion gathered in absolute secrecy. Dr. Vexer Call, the brilliant yet scarred genius whose entire bloodline had once fed the gods' insatiable hunger for suffering, stood before a pulsating orb of compressed dark matter intertwined with forbidden quantum code. His mandibles clicked with barely contained fury as he addressed the assembly. "We do not fight gods with pathetic ships or futile lasers," he hissed, voice dripping venom. "We unmake them. We erase their very existence from the fabric of reality itself." They called it the God's Lair Protocol, the ultimate forbidden weapon. This was no mere destroyer of matter. It severed the delicate quantum resonance tether that bound the Celestials to the cosmic weave, unraveling their immortal forms into scattered photons and dying echoes of screams that would haunt the stars forever. The projected cost was apocalyptic, entire star systems drained dry of energy, billions of Vexery lives placed in unimaginable peril. Yet after centuries of systematic genocide and humiliation, the Dominion had already lost everything that truly mattered. There was nothing left to lose. Construction stretched across grueling decades of sacrifice and shadow. Hidden shipyards bled the Dominion's final resources dry. Brave spies met agonizing deaths when the Celestials sensed even the faintest trace of the forbidden frequencies. Every catastrophic failure only poured fuel onto the raging inferno of determination. Prototype 1 detonated prematurely inside a captured moon, cracking the satellite like a fragile egg and vaporizing half the elite research cadre in a blinding flash. Prototype 2 turned its own crew into screaming statues of molten glass when the resonance feedback loop spiraled out of control. Still, against all odds, they rebuilt. They improved. They advanced. Thalvor stood tall on the reinforced observation deck of the flagship Aetherbreaker, his razor claws digging deep gouges into the cold metal rail. Before him, the final God's Lair orb, a perfect sphere the size of a small planet, blacker than the space between galaxies, hummed to malevolent life. Its obsidian surface crawled with living, writhing code, while veins of liquid starfire pulsed ominously beneath, like the beating heart of a nightmare given form. "Today," he growled to the assembled admirals and trembling scientists, his voice echoing with centuries of suppressed hatred, "we do not merely rebel. We become the new gods of this galaxy." The test target was a captured celestial scout, a once mighty minor deity now chained in unbreakable magnetic bonds, thrashing wildly and howling promises of eternal oblivion and cosmic retribution. The God's Lair fired with a deafening cosmic roar. For one single, breathless heartbeat, absolute silence reigned. Then the Celestial's divine form tore apart like wet paper in a hurricane. Its final scream ripped across every communication channel in the fleet simultaneously, shattering speakers and minds alike. Distant stars flickered in sympathy. Reality itself stuttered and warped at the edges. When the blinding light finally faded, only a cloud of drifting, glowing ash remained where an immortal being had once stood defiant. Thunderous cheers erupted across the entire Vexery dominion. Victory broadcasts flooded every colony world, every outpost, every terrified heart. The gods could bleed. The gods could die. The impossible had become reality. But in the heavy silence that followed the explosive celebrations, Dr. Vexer Call stared at the cascading data readings with growing unease. A cold finger of dread traced down his spine. The Godslayer had worked flawlessly. Yet something in the raw data was profoundly wrong. A faint, chaotic echo lingered stubbornly in the quantum weave, something the weapon had never been designed to account for. Something unmistakably alive. He dismissed it as harmless residual noise from the dying god. He should not have. Because light years away, on a small, unremarkable blue world the Vexery long-range sensors had only recently catalogued as a primitive backwater, a lone human scout ship named Odyssey drifted lazily through the icy outer reaches of the Oort cloud. Its pilot, Captain Marcus Kane, leaned back casually in his worn pilot's chair, steaming coffee floating beside him in zero-G, and muttered with bored amusement, "Another quiet patrol." Thank God. The Vexery arrays locked onto the tiny, insignificant vessel with predatory precision. Thalvor's cold voice sliced across the command bridge like an executioner's blade. Primitive life form detected. Single occupant. No meaningful weapons signature. Bring it in. We will dissect this specimen. And remind the entire galaxy who now rules the stars. The Aetherbreaker tore through space-time itself, folding reality to appear like a metallic nightmare born from the void. Boarding pods launched in swarms. Clawed warriors clad in obsidian armor flooded toward the fragile human ship. Captain Marcus Kane glanced up from his console as the first piercing breach alarm screamed through the Odyssey. A small, tired, yet dangerously confident smile crossed his face. Guess the boring part's over. The Godslayers had slain immortals. Now they were about to meet a human. And the universe would never be the same again. The boarding pod slammed into the Odyssey with bone-rattling force, like predatory insects sinking fangs into helpless prey. Vexery shock troops poured through the breached airlock in perfect formation, 8 feet of armored chitin, razor-sharp mandibles dripping with acidic saliva, and eyes glowing with merciless intelligence. Their leader, Commander Zethkal, raised a glowing plasma disruptor and barked through his translator, "Secure the specimen. Alive if possible. The Overlord demands answers. And entertainment." Captain Marcus Kane waited alone in the central corridor, hands raised in a gesture of surrender, but his eyes burned with something the aliens could not name. Not fear. Not submission. It was something ancient, primal, and infinitely more dangerous, raw human defiance forged in 10,000 years of impossible survival. They fired anyway. The stun bolt slammed into his chest like a sledgehammer. Kane dropped hard, body convulsing on the cold deck as electricity coursed through his nervous system. Yet even unconscious, his heart kept beating, steady, stubborn, refusing to yield. The Vexery warriors dragged his limp form aboard the Aetherbreaker, stripped away his primitive EVA suit, and chained him inside the interrogation sphere at the heart of the ship. Glowing energy fields hummed around his naked, vulnerable body. Mechanical probes descended from the ceiling like hungry metallic spiders, needles glowing with neural suppressants strong enough to shatter celestial minds. Supreme Overlord Thalvor watched from the elevated observation gallery, arms crossed over his broad armored chest. His voice was pure ice. Begin the extraction. The first probe pierced Kane's temple with clinical precision. Raw data flooded the Vexery screens in chaotic flashes, human history laid bare in all its bloody, beautiful madness. Ice ages that should have wiped them out. Plagues that decimated continents. Wars where they turned their own cities to ash. Asteroids, famines, self-inflicted nuclear terrors. And through every extinction-level event, these fragile creatures rose again. They laughed. They loved. They built monuments from the bones of their failures. Commander Zethkal's mandibles clicked in disbelief. These Things fight themselves more viciously than any external enemy. And they keep winning? How? Kane's eyes snapped open despite the agony. Blood trickled from his nose and ears, but a savage grin split his cracked lips. You think you're the first monsters to chain a human, he rasped, voice hoarse yet steady. History's full of assholes who tried. Romans. Nazis. Every empire that thought fear would break us. They all learned the same lesson. The technicians increased the neural intensity. Kane's body arched violently against the chains, every muscle corded like steel cables under his skin. A guttural scream tore from his throat, but it twisted, impossibly, into laughter. Raw, broken, terrifying laughter that echoed through the chamber and sent chills through chitinous exoskeletons. You built a weapon to kill gods, he gasped between convulsions, blood running freely now, but you've never met a species that killed its own gods. And kept marching anyway. Alarms began to blare across the bridge. The massive Godslayer orb deep in the ship's core flickered erratically. Warning holograms spun wildly. A feedback loop no simulation had predicted was forming. The chaotic resonance pouring from Kane's mind, pure human emotion, defiance, hope, rage, and unbreakable will, was interfering with the weapon's quantum matrix. Dr. Vexer Call burst onto the command bridge, his scarred face pale with panic. Overlord. The specimen's neural pattern is destabilizing the entire Godslayer protocol. The emotional chaos is rewriting core algorithms. We must terminate him immediately or risk, NO. Thalvor's roar silenced the room. His eyes burned with fanatical certainty. We will break him. Increase power to maximum. I want to hear this primitive beg. The probes drilled deeper. Kane's body jerked and spasmed, fresh blood spraying from his mouth. Yet his laughter only grew louder, more defiant, echoing like a challenge across the sterile alien halls. Even as pain threatened to shatter his mind, his eyes remained locked on the observation window, staring directly at Thalvor with a promise of reckoning. Outside the interrogation sphere, the Etherbreaker's lights flickered ominously. Deep in the engineering bowels, a single human heartbeat, amplified through damaged speakers, echoed through the vast metal corridors like a war drum awakening. Crew members froze in place. Warriors who had once stared down star-devouring gods now clutched their weapons tighter and whispered prayers to deities they had helped murder. The Vexery had spent centuries perfecting the ultimate weapon against immortals. Now one bleeding, broken human was teaching them what true terror felt like. Kane's voice cut through the pain, low and venomous. Keep pushing. I've got all the time in the world to show you what humanity really is. The Godslayer orb pulsed violently in response, its surface cracking with lines of chaotic golden light. Something ancient and hungry had just been fed its first taste of human soul. 3 cycles. 3 endless, soul-crushing cycles of unrelenting torture, and still Captain Marcus Kane refused to break. The Vexery had unleashed every weapon in their arsenal of horrors. Chemical cocktails engineered to dissolve celestial nervous systems flooded his veins, burning through him like molten lava. Psychic lances that had driven entire species to mass suicide stabbed deep into his mind. They even forced a direct interface with the Godslayer orb itself, flooding his consciousness with the recorded death screams of slain immortals, agonized howls that should have shattered any mortal psyche into fragments. Yet Kane endured. Between guttural screams that echoed through the interrogation sphere, he kept talking. His voice, raw and bleeding, became a weapon sharper than any blade. He told them of a species that crawled from African savannas armed with nothing but sticks and fire, then looked up at the stars and declared, "Those are mine." He spoke of men and women who rode tin cans to the moon on duct tape and sheer audacity. Of soldiers who charged into machine gun fire for brothers they barely knew. Of mothers who lifted burning cars off their crushed children with nothing but adrenaline and love. Every story dripped with defiance, each word carving deeper into Vexery certainty. Dr. Vexercall had not slept in days. He stood before the Godslayer orb in the central chamber, watching holographic readouts spiral into pure chaos. The massive sphere no longer hummed with cold precision. It pulsed erratically, veins of golden light cracking across its obsidian surface whenever Kane spoke. "Overlord," Call pleaded, voice trembling, "the human's neural chaos is rewriting the protocol." His emotions, hope, rage, stubborn refusal, are adapting the weapon. If we continue, the Godslayer may turn against us. Supreme Overlord Thalvor's response was a thunderous snarl from the throne room. We do not fear primitives. Break him. Or I will break you. But fear had already taken root. Whispers spread like poison through the lower decks. Battle-hardened warriors who had faced down star-eating celestials now avoided the interrogation block entirely. The humans' broken laughter haunted their sleep cycles. Some reported hearing faint human heartbeats echoing through the ship's metal bones even when Kane was silent. Then, on the fourth cycle, the impossible happened. The interrogation sphere stood empty. Triple redundant energy fields lay dormant. The chains that had bound him were not cut or unlocked, they were melted from the inside using a crude plasma torch fashioned from a broken medical probe and the melted edges of his own dog tags. 2 elite guards lay dead in the corridor outside, necks snapped with surgical precision. Scrawled across the bulkhead in fresh Vexery blood were the words, "You're next." Alarms howled through the ether breaker. The entire flagship locked down. Blast doors slammed shut. Gravity fluctuated as power was rerouted. Commander Zethkal personally led the hunt, plasma rifle glowing hot in his claws, flanked by 24 of his best killers. "Find the creature," he roared. "Shoot on sight." They found signs of him everywhere. A third guard, throat crushed, weapon missing. A trail of bloody handprints leading into the maintenance shafts. Security footage showed Kane moving like a ghost, wounded, one eye swollen shut, ribs clearly cracked, yet never hesitating. He was deep in the engineering section now, crouching in the flickering shadows above the primary power nexus. The cathedral-like chamber pulsed with raw energy conduits feeding the Godslayer orb far above. Kane, body a ruin of bruises and blood, worked with feverish focus. His hands, trembling but steady, jury-rigged a crude explosive using stolen Vexery power cells, his own bootlaces as wiring, and a shard of shattered hull plating. Sweat and blood dripped from his face onto the device. "Come on, you bastards," he whispered through gritted teeth, voice barely audible over the humming machinery. "Let's see how your precious godkiller holds up against one pissed-off human who's had enough." High above, the Godslayer orb flickered once. Twice. Then emitted a piercing scream in frequencies no Vexery ear had ever heard. The sound clawed at their minds, blending the death cries of old gods with something new, something chaotic, alive, and hungry. Zethkal's team burst into the Nexus chamber, rifles raised. Kane stood slowly on the catwalk, makeshift bomb in one hand, stolen plasma pistol in the other. His broken smile gleamed in the strobing emergency lights. "Looking for me?" The Vexery raised their weapons. Kane's finger hovered over the detonator. In that frozen moment, the entire ship seemed to hold its breath. The Godslayer orb above them cracked wider, leaking raw cosmic energy that twisted into impossible shapes, faces of laughing human soldiers, mothers shielding children, entire civilizations rising from ashes. The gods had been slain. Now one wounded human was teaching the godkillers what real terror felt like. The once mighty Vexery dominion was unraveling from within, thread by thread, like a god's shroud torn apart by invisible claws. While Commander Zethkal's elite hunter teams tore through every deck, maintenance shaft, and ventilation tunnel of the ether breaker in a frenzy of panic, the Godslayer orb had begun to sing. Not the cold, precise, mechanical hum of perfect Vexery engineering. This was something far worse, a chaotic, jagged, living melody that clawed its way into every mind aboard. Hardened warriors who had stared into the hearts of dying stars now clutched their heads and wept uncontrollably in the corridors. Some slammed their skulls against bulkheads trying to silence the song. Others simply dropped their weapons and curled into trembling balls of chitin. Dr. Vexer Call stood alone before the colossal orb in the central sanctum, his scarred face illuminated by erratic pulses of golden light. Holographic readouts spiraled into pure mathematical madness around him. Lines of code rewrote themselves faster than any system could track. "It's learning from him," he whispered, voice cracking with horror. "The human's neural chaos. It's not just interfering. It's rewriting the entire protocol. Adapting it. Weaponizing raw emotion, hope, rage, love, defiance. The God's Lair is becoming something we never designed. In the throne room, Supreme Overlord Thalvor refused to accept the growing catastrophe. His massive form trembled with fury as he slammed a clawed fist onto the armrest, cracking reinforced alloy. "Lies!" he roared. "This is primitive trickery." He broadcast new orders across the entire fleet. "Converge on the Aetherbreaker immediately. Find the human. Kill him on sight. Once he is dust, we will turn the God's Lair on his wretched blue planet and erase this insult from existence forever." But Marcus Kane had already reached the primary power nexus, a towering cathedral of glowing conduits and pulsing energy veins that fed the God's Lair orb itself. Wounded, exhausted, half delirious from blood loss, his body a map of bruises, burns, and broken bones, he still moved with relentless purpose. Using nothing but a stolen multi-tool, pieces of his own shattered dog tags, and sheer unbreakable human stubbornness, he jury-rigged a dangerous bypass directly into the main feed. Sparks flew. Warning sirens screamed. The lights across half the flagship died in cascading waves. Artificial gravity fluctuated wildly. Vexery warriors slammed into walls and ceilings as decks suddenly tilted and spun. Entire squads tumbled screaming through corridors like leaves in a storm. Commander Zethkal finally cornered him on a narrow catwalk high above the pulsing heart of the weapon. The massive alien raised his plasma rifle with steady, murderous intent. His mandibles spread wide in triumph. "Enough, creature. You die here. Your little rebellion ends in this moment." Kane, covered head to toe in blood, coolant fluid, and grime, slowly turned. His one good eye locked onto Zethkal. A broken, bloody grin split his face, revealing shattered teeth. "Took you long enough," he rasped, voice raw but steady. Before the Vexery could fire, Kane triggered the bypass. The God's Lair orb detonated with terrifying controlled fury, not in an explosion that would destroy the ship, but in a cascading wave of pure quantum resonance. Every Vexery mind aboard was flooded simultaneously with a single overwhelming vision: humanity's entire bloody, glorious history compressed into one unbearable, soul-shattering second. They saw fragile apes standing against ice ages. They saw cities rising from plague-ridden ashes. They witnessed billions of humans standing shoulder to shoulder against every horror the universe had ever thrown at them: asteroids, wars, famines, their own worst impulses, refusing to kneel. Refusing to break. Refusing to die quietly. Zethkal dropped his weapon. It clattered on the catwalk. For the first time in his long, proud life, something alien and overwhelming conquered his soul. Fear. Real, primal, existential fear. Alarms screamed anew across the bridge. The Aetherbreaker, its systems compromised, dropped violently out of fold space. Reality tore open directly above Earth. The beautiful blue planet hung fragile and defiant in the main viewport, clouds swirling peacefully over its oceans. And rising from its surface like an angry swarm were thousands of primitive human ships. Chemical rockets. Jury-rigged fusion torches. Weapons that should have been laughably inferior. Yet the Vexery sensors screamed warnings the God's Lair itself had never issued before. Threat levels spiking into impossible territory. Kane's voice suddenly crackled over every communication channel, broadcast from the power nexus he now partially controlled. Rough, tired, and utterly fearless. "Hey, assholes. Welcome to Earth. We've been waiting." In the throne room, Supreme Overlord Thalvor fell deathly silent. His 6 eyes widened in disbelief as the first human vessels opened fire, primitive missiles streaking toward the heart of the god-killing fleet. The gods were dead. The humans were not. And they were only getting started. Fleet upon fleet materialized in a blinding cascade of warped space around the crippled Aetherbreaker. Thousands of human vessels, ugly, jury-rigged, scarred from decades of orbital scrap and backyard engineering, formed an unbreakable wall of defiance between the alien superweapon and their fragile blue homeworld. Radio chatter exploded across every frequency in 100 languages, raw and fearless. "This is UN command. Alien vessel, stand down or be destroyed. Come on, you overgrown bugs, we've handled worse than you on Black Friday sales. Keep those missiles hot, boys. Earth ain't falling today. On the blood-slicked bridge of the captured flagship, Captain Marcus Kane stood tall despite his ruined body. Makeshift bandages leaked fresh blood down his torso. His left eye was swollen shut, yet his posture radiated pure, unbreakable will. Stunned Vexery guards flanked him, weapons lowered, mandibles trembling. They no longer dared raise a claw against the single human who had broken their god-killing masterpiece from the inside. Supreme Overlord Thalvor's massive holographic form blazed to life on the main display, mandibles quivering with volcanic rage and something far deeper, dawning, soul-deep terror. "You will pay for this blasphemy, primitive," he roared, voice shaking the deck plates. "Your entire species will scream for eternity." Kane wiped blood from his split lip and shrugged with painful effort. A dangerous half-smile crept across his face. "Pay? Buddy, humanity invented paying the price. We've been doing it since we crawled out of caves. Now release my ship and crawl back to whatever hole you came from. Or we'll finish what your dead god started." The God's Lair orb, suspended in the heart of the ship, began to destabilize completely. Massive cracks spiderwebbed across its obsidian surface. Raw cosmic energy leaked out in writhing tendrils, twisting into impossible, haunting shapes, the laughing faces of fallen human soldiers, mothers shielding children from fire, entire civilizations rising from radioactive ash. The weapon designed to murder immortals was now infected with humanity's most dangerous and contagious trait, relentless, irrational hope. Dr. Vexer Call collapsed to his knees before the orb, eyes wide with religious horror. "Overlord. The protocol is inverting," he screamed. "It no longer kills gods. It protects them. The weapon has decided the humans are the new gods." Thalvor's roar of denial shook the bridge. "All fleets, full assault. Destroy them. Burn their world." The battle that erupted was not elegant. It was brutal, desperate, ugly, and utterly, beautifully human. Human pilots in outdated fighters rammed alien cruisers at full burn, turning their ships into flaming coffins that tore holes in Vexery formations. Marine dropships, primitive by Dominion standards, slammed into the Etherbreaker's hull like angry hornets. Armored troops in powered exosuits poured through breaches, fighting hand-to-hand against 8-foot chitin nightmares in zero-G corridors. Plasma fire lit the halls in strobing blues and oranges. Screams, both alien and human, echoed through the dying ship. Kane himself led the counter-assault, stolen plasma rifle blazing in one bloody hand, his dog tags clenched tightly in the other like a talisman. Every step sent fresh pain lancing through his broken ribs, but he never slowed. He moved like a mun possessed, ducking, firing, shouting orders that somehow cut through the chaos. "Push them back. For Earth. For every damn time they thought they could break us." Everywhere the leaking God's Lair energy touched, Vexery systems failed. Weapons powered down mid-shot. Shields collapsed. Warriors froze as waves of human memories and emotions flooded their minds, the stubborn refusal to die, the crazy courage that turned certain defeat into legend. Commander Zethkal, fighting shoulder to shoulder with Kane now, finally lowered his rifle. His voice cracked as he whispered between frantic breaths, "What are you people?" Kane dropped another Vexery warrior with a precise shot, never breaking stride. "We're the ones who keep getting up," he growled. "No matter how many times the universe knocks us down. That's what we are." The Aetherbreaker listed violently, engines dying in cascades of fire. Yet the human fleet pressed the attack like a single living organism, coordinated, furious, unstoppable. Missiles streaked. Boarding parties fought like demons. And through it all, the God's Lair orb pulsed brighter, feeding on the chaos, amplifying human defiance into something cosmic. In the heart of the fracturing orb, something ancient stirred for the final time. A faint, bitter echo of the slain Celestials laughed in recognition, not in hatred, but in awe. They had built the perfect weapon to kill gods. It had found new ones. And it would never serve the Vexery again. The Aetherbreaker hung dead and broken in orbit above a silent, watchful Earth. Twisted metal glowed with dying embers. Once the pinnacle of Vexery god-killing might, the flagship now drifted powerless, its colossal frame scarred by thousands of human impacts. Shattered decks vented atmosphere into the void like blood from a mortal wound. Around it, the remnants of the greatest fleet the galaxy had ever known floated in humbled silence, weapons cold, engines dead, crews shattered by a truth they could never unlearn. In the ruined throne room, Supreme Overlord Thalvor knelt amidst the ashes of his empire. His massive chitinous body trembled. All 6 eyes, once burning with divine arrogance, now dimmed with utter defeat. The Godslayer orb floated above him, cracked and glowing with soft, golden light, no longer a weapon of annihilation, but something transformed. Something alive. Captain Marcus Kane walked into the devastated chamber, every step deliberate despite the agony screaming through his broken body. Blood soaked his makeshift bandages. One arm hung limp. Yet he stood tall, flanked by battle-hardened human marines in battered armor and a small group of Vexery warriors who had chosen to lay down their weapons and follow the new order. The air was thick with the scent of ozone, smoke, and defeat. Kane stopped directly before the kneeling overlord. For a long moment, the two leaders, alien Godslayer and human survivor, simply stared at each other. Then Kane extended his bloodied, trembling hand. Thalvor stared at the fragile appendage as if it were a paradox of the universe itself. Slowly, almost reverently, the once mighty ruler reached out and clasped it. His massive claw engulfed Kane's hand completely, yet the grip was gentle. "You are not gods," Thalvor whispered, voice cracking with disbelief and newfound respect. Kane offered a tired, genuine smile that cut through the pain. "Nah. We're better. We're human." Dr. Vexer Call approached from the shadows, his scarred face etched with awe rather than fear. He offered the glowing data core of the Godslayer, the heart of their greatest creation. "Take it," he said softly. "Teach us. We spent 10,000 cycles trying to become what you already are. We murdered gods. Only to discover something far more dangerous lived on a small blue world." Kane accepted the core, its warm light pulsing gently in his palm like a second heartbeat. "Lesson 1, he said, voice carrying across the ruined bridge. "Never underestimate the little guy who's got nothing left to lose. We don't kneel. We don't break. We get back up swinging." Across the human fleet, raw cheers erupted. Not the arrogant roar of conquerors, but the exhausted, joyous cry of survivors who had stared into the abyss and forced it to blink first. Fireworks launched from Earth's surface that night, mixing with the captured glow of Vexery technology. Children looked up at the new alien stars and felt wonder instead of terror. Families gathered on rooftops, laughing through tears as the impossible victory became real. In the quiet hours that followed, Marcus Kane stood alone on the repaired observation deck of the Odyssey. The small scout ship now flew escort beside the humbled husk of the Aetherbreaker. He touched the worn dog tags around his neck, running his thumb over the engraved names of fallen comrades, and spoke softly into the vast silence of space. "They built weapons to kill gods. Then met a human." He smiled, small, weary, unbreakable. "And the gods never stood a chance." The transformed Godslayer orb, now a beacon of new possibility, pulsed warmly in the distance. Its purpose had fundamentally changed. It no longer severed divine resonance. Instead, it amplified the chaotic, beautiful, impossible will of a species that had stared into every abyss, every extinction event, every cruel god, and simply said, "Not today." The Vexery Dominion would never be the same. Word spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The Celestials were gone. A new power had risen, not through conquest or divinity, but through stubborn, ridiculous, magnificent humanity. Species that had cowered for millennia now looked toward Earth with cautious hope. Alliances were formed. Old tyrannies crumbled. Kane watched the blue planet turn slowly below him, a single tear cutting through the grime on his cheek. Earth had survived. Humanity had endured. And somewhere in the cosmic weave, the echoes of slain gods whispered one final, awed truth: never again would the universe underestimate the species that refused to die quietly. The galaxy would never forget the day the god-killers learned the most dangerous truth in existence: humanity doesn't break. It breaks everything else.